Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Recovery Summit presentation. We are on the last week of our presentations, which is very exciting. We've been presenting all month long during September, which is National Recovery Month. The Recovery Summit this month has been presented by St. Clair County Community Mental Health with support from the St. Clair County Health Department. Today's presentation is strategies to help a person succeed, which we're really excited about. I've been waiting for this presentation all month, so I'm really excited to have Mary along with us. A couple of housekeeping like we generally do. Use the chat feature for any questions, comments. If time allows at the end, we'll go ahead and be able to answer questions from the presenter. If time doesn't allow, Mary's going to provide all of her contact information so that you can contact her directly. Today's presentation offers one social work continuing education credit and one McBAP credit. If you're requesting professional credits, you must definitely remain on the webinar the entirety of the time. If you lose connection yourself, that's all right. Just jump back on as soon as you can, and we will hopefully be able to still give you credit. Survey is going to pop up at the conclusion, just like all of the other webinars. Please complete them. We really appreciate any feedback that you have. So does our presenter. And we also need those for continuing education credit. So it's really important. Now I'd like to go ahead and introduce our presenter today, Mary Schulk. Mary is the program director at Partners in Prevention and has coordinated a project on fetal alcohol syndrome disorder for the last century. So we're very excited to have Mary along with us today. Good morning, Mary.
Good morning. I'm so excited to have everybody here. This is such an important topic, and I'm very excited to be able to share. You know, some of the basics. Fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, first of all, is not a diagnostic term. It's an umbrella term that covers a number of disorders that are a result of prenatal alcohol exposure. Latest estimates suggest that 1 in 5 children are impacted by prenatal alcohol exposure. And of course, this is something that doesn't go away. So we're looking at those numbers in adults as well. Just briefly, my contact information, so that if you like to get in touch with me, there it is. We are a very small nonprofit with a very big mission, serving 4 counties in the northeast part of the Lower Peninsula. This subject is near and dear to my heart. We see this again and again with people who are struggling, who may not know why they're struggling, may not be diagnosed. Even for those who are diagnosed, getting appropriate services is a real challenge. So I thank you for being here and being willing to learn more and to share more about this topic. Fetal alcohol spectrum disorders is the leading known cause of intellectual disability. And we wonder, how does this happen? Well, about half of the pregnancies in this country are unplanned. And we do have a love affair with alcohol. And so it's only natural that those two are going to crash into each other. Pregnancies aren't planned. A woman may be several months into a pregnancy, especially when it's unplanned, and not even know that she's pregnant and the embryo is exposed. So it's important for us to know that the placenta doesn't offer any protection from alcohol. Whatever this pregnant woman is ingesting is going to that embryo or fetus, depending on the stage. The baby's blood alcohol content will be the same as mom's within minutes of exposure. And it doesn't matter what kind of alcohol we're talking about. It all has the same potential to cause damage. And as a society, we're kind of confused about, what does a serving mean? You know, a wine glass, we have these big, beautiful wine glasses. 5 ounces, just barely over half a cup, is considered one serving. Many mixed drinks are really a binge in a glass. So as an audience here talking about substance use disorders, you're familiar with this perhaps more than most. But it's so important that we're understanding it doesn't matter what type of alcohol we're talking about. It all has the potential to cause harm. As far back as 1996, the Institute of Medicine put out this statement, and research has continued to reinforce this. Of all the substances of abuse, including cocaine, heroin, and marijuana, alcohol produces by far the most serious neurobehavioral effects in the fetus. None of these substances are good, right, for a developing baby. But alcohol causes the most long-term brain damage of all of these substances. So this just illustrates in a little bit of a graph You can see their alcohol does not result typically in withdrawal symptoms, but we do have lots of impacts that we're going to look at a little more closely here as we move on. I want us to understand that alcohol can impact this developing embryo or fetus anytime during the pregnancy. And as we look at this chart, it's important to recognize that we're looking here at the first 8 weeks. This chart is not proportional as it goes across the page. So look at the tremendous number of systems that can be impacted. In the first 8 weeks, often when a woman doesn't even know that she's pregnant yet. But it's also really important that we recognize that the brain is vulnerable the entire time of pregnancy. Research has tried to identify a safe amount of alcohol exposure, and they have not been able to do that. Research has shown that even one incident of binge drinking, and for women, that's 4 drinks at a sitting, can cause permanent brain damage. So there is no known type of alcohol, no time during pregnancy that exposure is safe. There's no known quantity, no known frequency. This is an extreme picture of the kind of brain damage that can occur. The brain that we see on the left was so severely damaged that this was not compatible with life. What you can't see is that there's a sheet of tissue obscuring the brain surface. You can tell the difference in texture, in pattern, in how that brain developed. Again, this is a very severe case. This is not typical. We're going to look at what's more typical in a little bit. But, as cells are developing, there's such potential for damage. We all started out as a single cell, that fertilized egg. Every cell contains all of the genetic information. Only certain genes are going to be activated. At its peak, 250,000 new neurons are created every minute. That's incredible to think about. But at week 10, differentiation begins. So at first we have the cell proliferation. Cells are multiplying and multiplying and multiplying. Then we get to that point where cells are becoming the type of cell they need to be. They are migrating to certain parts of the body. And when we're looking specifically at the brain, certain parts of the brain, they're becoming the type of cell they need to be. That genetic code is being turned on for what that cell's purpose is. They're differentiating into different types of cells. Around week 10 is when the main parts of those brain cells begin differentiating. And what can happen when there's alcohol exposure? It absolutely can kill brain cells, and it can create confusion in that determination, that differentiation, and that migration. Cells don't end up in the places they are supposed to be, or they are confused about what type of cells and what is their purpose? What is their performance intention? We see here those same 2 brains in cross section, and you can see the tremendous amount of brain matter that simply is missing. These massive holes, that the ventricles are very large. The white matter is very poorly formed. And we see a very primitive pattern in the cortex, in that gyral pattern. When we talk about neuroplasticity of the brain, we're really talking about that ability for the brain to change because of connections. It's not really able to change in regard to structure or function. So when we see this kind of damage, that is not something that can be undone. Just very quickly, want to help you understand the different parts of the brain that can be impacted and what their purposes are. It really helps us understand a lot more about why this matters. So the hippocampus involved in learning and memory absolutely can be impacted. The corpus callosum, that band of tissue that's connecting the 2 hemispheres of the brain. We're going to look here at in a moment about what that damage can look like. The basal ganglia basically acts like the transmission in our brain, like a transmission would in a vehicle. It's processing memory. It's that ability to predict outcomes. So many things that are important in our daily functioning, and it's helping shift gears, help shifting information where it needs to go. Here we see what a corpus callosum should like in this picture on the left. You see that band of tissue where the arrow is pointing. That's what the corpus callosum typically should look like. In the picture in the center, we see how it is smaller, thinner, shaped differently. In the picture on the right, we can see it's missing completely. The cerebellum, so important. It's only about 10% of our brain volume, but it contains about half of our neurons. So it's a very dense part of the brain. It regulates the flow of information between different systems. It sends signals to the prefrontal cortex and to the motor cortices. And if it's damaged, those signals are very much disjointed. The frontal lobes, the last part of our brain to develop, responsible for those executive functions, being able to put all the information together. Very important in impulse control, as is the corpus callosum. It's the part of our brain that's responsible for us to be able to make good judgment, good decisions. So when you think about impulse control, if we've got those areas of the brain that are damaged, this is such a great illustration of, we don't have that ability to pause, to consider. It comes into our mind and we do it, or we say it. So the insula is loaded deep within the brain. It's responsible for all that interoceptive input from all of our senses, helps us regulate what our body is going to do, even our basic things like, body temperature and knowing where we are in time and space. Several neurochemicals, these are just 3 examples of neurochemicals that can be impacted by prenatal alcohol exposure. If we think of the basal ganglia as the transmission, then dopamine is the transmission fluid. It's really helping things flow smoothly. It's helping us shift gears more easily from one thing to another. Oxytocin is considered the cuddle hormone, that ability to connect and to feel connection with other people and want to be connected. Glutamate is the most abundant neurotransmitter that we have in our central nervous system. It's involved in practically every major excitatory brain function. It increases the likelihood that a neuron is going to be active, that it's going to fire when it needs to. So if it's not there, if it's not functioning properly, it impacts our abilities, our brain's ability to carry out the functions it's intended to do. The HPA axis, so important in our functioning, our regulation of our reactions to stress. It regulates a lot of different body processes like digestion, our immune system, managing our moods and emotions, our sexual responses, even how we store and expend energy. And this is another system in the body that can be impacted by prenatal alcohol exposure. So what happens if our cortisol levels are too high, right? We all need certain levels of cortisol. Cortisol isn't all bad, but when our cortisol levels are too high, we see anxiety, depression, headaches, nervous system problems, digestive issues, high blood pressure. So we're not only talking about brain function, we're talking about major system functions as well that are impacted by prenatal alcohol exposure. So this picture shows us what's more typical of brain damage. When we're looking physical damage, we see these small lesions in the brain, not the massive holes that we saw in the other picture, but these small lesions. And as you're thinking about how the brain transmits information, how those signals flow from one cell to another, to another, to another, when it hits one of these lesions, that process is broken. Our brain may be able to find another path, but it absolutely is impacting how those cells are able to communicate with each other. So IQ is one thing that, we typically use to measure intelligence. IQ is not a very good measure of intelligence when we're talking about prenatal alcohol exposure. Generally, people will be in the borderline to average, low average range, but that doesn't mean they're fully able to access what we would expect based on that IQ. We certainly do see ranges from very high to very low. Strengths and deficits in certain areas of brain and certain areas of function. Verbal skills are often very good, but their ability to interpret what they're saying or understand may be much less. So they can talk a good talk, but may not be able to really fully understand what they themselves are saying or what other people are saying. Difficulty in nonverbal responses. They find it very difficult to interpret facial expression, tone of voice, even body posture, those kinds of things that are nonverbal. And social behaviors. It's one of the things that's most heartbreaking to our families is to see their children struggle with friendships. And often this carries into adulthood as well. When your developmental level is much lower than your chronological age, it makes things very difficult for making and maintaining friendships. So executive functioning is where we see many difficulties. And again, IQ may be in a normal range, but that doesn't mean executive functioning is matching that level. You might have noticed a water bottle pop up there on the screen. One of the things that Partners in Prevention were really big on is encouraging people to take good care of yourself. And hydration is a very important part of that. So if you have a water bottle nearby, go ahead, make sure you're taking a drink and keeping yourself well hydrated. It's something that's really important for our brain function as well. But executive functions is one of those areas where we're seeing a lot of difficulty. So the ability to plan ahead, to solve problems, to take information from a number of different areas and put it together, to put those pieces together and make sense of it. Those are real challenges. Being able to be flexible in their thinking. People tend to be very black and white, very concrete, and find it very difficult to think about things in a different way, to take another person's point of view into consideration. Again, that impulse control is often not good, but yet the ability to process information may be significantly slower. So taking in information, making sense of it, understanding what they're hearing, and being able to then to use that information, those processes may be slowed down a bit. Some of our families describe their kids as I have a 10-second kid in a 1-second world. They can do things, they can accomplish things, but they may need a little more time, both to take into information and to be able to produce a response. They have a difficulty taking in information in a way that's helpful and knowing how do I use that to improve, to make things better for myself. So when all this is happening before, a child even takes its first breath, that we know that alcohol has this potential to cause significant harm. I know I'm going very quickly. I know I have more slides than we will get through today, but I wanted you to be able to have that information to refer back to later once those slides are available in a few days. I think it's important that for us that we're taking a moment just to kind of pause to absorb what we've heard so far before we move on. So we've already begun to get a sense of the consequences, but we want to think it in more specific terms. This is so variable. We're going to talk about a lot of different things today. I don't want to give you the impression that every person who is exposed is going to experience all of the same consequences. It's very much dose responsive. It depends on what was growing and developing in that fetus or that embryo at the time of exposure. There are so many other factors. What is mom's nutrition level? What is her overall health? What is her mental wellness? What other kinds of things are going on? This all has a tremendous ability to impact not only what's being exposed, what the consequences will be, but the severity of the consequences. This is not an across-the-board overall impact. It's absolutely, again, dose responsive depending on what's growing and developing at that time. People may have areas of brilliance and other areas where they're very much lacking. So what if, this was a question that Diane Malbin raised, was the first one that I heard her raise this question. What if this is a physical disability based on brain impact? And certainly it is. That's exactly what it is. There are some physical impacts we saw in that slide earlier, physical systems that can be impacted by prenatal alcohol exposure. But most of the consequences we're seeing are related to damage to the brain. And those aren't so easily seen. We see them in behaviors. We see them in challenges in being able to learn, to do things in different ways, in ways that we expect others. So we're going to look at this in the sense of those primary performance domains as discussed by Diane Malbin, and knowing again, there are physical impacts as well, but we're looking primarily at the brain. So a little bit more about executive functioning. What does that involve? We've already talked about planning, but organizing, prioritizing, being able to put things in a sequence that makes sense so that we can put information together so the end product is what we need, that we're not getting things out of order so that then they don't fit well together. Even being able to initiate, to be able to start a task. Someone may be able to describe to you what they want to do and what the steps are that they need to take, but they have a hard time getting going. They have a difficulty just getting started, along with the ability to follow through, to continue with that task long enough to get it done. We're looking a lot at executive functioning because it is so important and because it is one of the things that can be so highly impacted. So that ability to look to the future, to understand what's going to come next, that can be as simple as, I have a lot of stories and I have to be careful not to get too carried away with stories for the sake of time. But a great example, a child is playing with a ball. They're in the living room. The ball hits a lamp falls over, the lamp breaks, and the child says, "Why am I in trouble? I didn't break the lamp, the ball did." Sounds like they're just being a smart aleck, but for some people, they cannot see that process, those steps, and how what they did led to that outcome. Just let that sink in for a moment. Think about how many challenges that presents when you don't understand those pieces and you don't understand how what you do now causes something to happen a moment from now, minutes from now, days from now. That ability to set goals and work toward a goal. You know, part of the executive functioning is understanding what those expectations are and then being able to follow through, being able to behave in a way that matches those expectations. We'll look at that too, again, as we move ahead and think about these things in a little bit different way. The ability to understand time is a very abstract thing. The fact that, who decided how long a minute is or an hour is? Some people will never fully understand the passage of time and what that means. They can read a clock, they can tell you what the clock says, but to fully understand what that means is something that eludes them. So then being on time, being able to stick to a schedule, those things become very difficult, not because they don't care, not because they're trying to be difficult, but because they really don't understand that concept of time. So if our judgment is impaired, what does that look like? The ability to take information, again, to be able to put those pieces together in a way that we can make good decisions. It's difficult for them to know not only a situation or people, what is safe or what is dangerous. Again, if you're not able to understand how things fit together and how jumping off a ladder could result in harm to you, and that you don't see those pieces, think of the dangerous situations people put themselves into, or the More and more, we need to be able to consider, is a person safe? How am I connecting with them? How do I know them? What do I know about them? They may put themselves there, they can be very gullible. They're very often taken advantage of because they don't understand that element of safety with individuals. They may have a really difficult time understanding the difference between reality and fantasy. What's true? What's real? What's not? What is just imagined? So again, knowing who is safe as far as another person, who is a stranger, what is a stranger? That in itself is kind of an abstract concept. We have families that have actually made a list because their kids tend to be very friendly and very outgoing, and they just meet someone, consider their new best friend. They've actually made specific lists of, this is who is okay, this is who is okay to hug, this is who is okay to talk to, this is who is not. So impulsivity, that ability, that's that ready, fire, oh, and then aim later. But impulsivity not only is in actions, it can be in words. It can be in the things we say. It's in the decisions that we make. We need to think about that impulsive behavior in that whole broad spectrum of what that means. And they may, after the fact, say, oh, I can see where that was not a good choice, or that was not a good idea, or I shouldn't have said that. But that ability to process that in the moment may be missing for them. And so they just jump right into situations. Whatever's on their mind spills out of their mouth. May get them into trouble, but just really lack that ability. And there are some things that can be done, but it takes very specific actions to help people with that impulsive behavior. Lots of challenges with memory. When we saw those different portions of the brain that can be impacted, so many different parts of our brain are involved in memory. So, these are kind of the steps that we go through, right? We're able to take information in, first of all. And that happens not only in what we're hearing, what we're seeing, it's all of our body systems, all of our sensory systems that are taking in that input. So we need to be able to take it in and then make sense of it. We need to integrate it into what we know. What do we associate it with? How do we connect it with prior experiences, with things we've already learned? Then we need to be able to file it away somewhere in a place that we can retrieve it later. So all these different brain systems involved in all these different parts of memory. Then once it's stored away, we need to be able to go back and find it again and make use of it. Free recall, probably going to be a challenge. If it's a cued recall, if we can give them something to relate it to, they may be better able to remember something that is stored away. There can be challenges with explicit memory where they have, specific details of an event. They may remember something more broadly. Then again, they may not know the big picture. They may remember the details. They have less trouble with that implicit memory. If it's something where they're completing a familiar task, that is something that they're more likely to be able to do. So repetition when somebody is learning something new is so critically important. We know that's how our brains are wired, that when we repeat an action, when we repeat a thought, when we repeat instructions, we're wiring that brain for those pathways to be well-traveled, to be strengthened. And so it takes a tremendous amount of repetition for someone to strengthen those pathways, to be able to remember how to do things. They may have difficulty with working memory, to be able to hold something in their mind while they're in the midst of doing something, to be able to make use of that. Verbal information can be especially difficult to encode it in a way that it can be taken in. Okay, remember, if your processing speed is slowed down and you're taking in information, but perhaps not as quickly as it's being delivered, It's difficult to carry on a conversation. It's difficult to learn in school. You're following along and you're doing the best you can, but your brain is processing what was said over here, and the teacher or somebody you're having a conversation with has already moved on over here. You're not taking in that new information because you're still back here trying to process what you've already heard and seen. When somebody is able to recall something, it may be in a completely random order, not in a logical, makes sense order. They're more likely to remember those things that are connected to an emotion that had some kind of feeling, some kind of imagery attached to them. I just learned recently that, of course, so much of our memory and so much of our recall is related to pictures. Our brain creates a picture for something it's hearing and seeing. One thing our brain doesn't make a picture of is don't. So when we're telling children or telling adults what we want them to do, it's so important to say what we want from them and not using don't. Because what their mind will do will create an image, but not the don't piece. So when we're saying, don't run, what they're seeing is an image of run without the don't. So it's especially important that we're communicating in ways that are, what do we want from a person? What is the expectation? What is the behavior we want to see? But memory, it's not just about forgetting things that you don't care about. It's not forgetting the homework assignment. It's also forgetting, that it's my birthday is coming and excited about that. So it can very much look like willful and intentional retrieving what you want to know and letting go of what you don't. But remember when we were looking at that picture, we saw that picture of the brain with those lesions where there was damage. Memory is one of those things that's very spotty and very inconsistent for individuals. And it all depends on what pathway that information is taking through the brain. If it finds a clear pathway, perhaps it's not such a problem. If it's taking a pathway where it bumps into one of those lesions where there is damage, that's completely thrown off track. So that inconsistent performance, not only in memory, but in the ability to carry out tasks, in the ability to do a lot of different things, is something that creates a lot of frustration, because people think, well, you did it yesterday, you did it the day before, you should be able to do it now. But that may not be the case. And it's not about willfulness. It's not about lack of desire. It's just, how is the brain functioning? So when they have difficulties like this, it's hard to learn from past mistakes. If you have difficulty putting the information together, if you have difficulty recalling where it's stored, if the pieces didn't make sense to you in the first place, of course it makes sense that they're not going to learn very well from past experiences. And so they do make the same mistakes over and over. I'm wondering if anybody's noticing the mistake in that sentence right there, in that little bit of information. Confabulation is something that's very confusing because someone has a poor memory, but people with an FASD tend to be friendly. They want to get along. They want to be able to contribute. And so confabulation is a piece of that. If they don't remember everything that is a piece of what they're being asked, they'll just fill in the missing pieces. It's not a desire to deceive. It's more of a desire to comply, to be able to look like they understand. They may even be confused themselves about what is true and what is a recall and what is the piece that they're filling in. So it looks like lying. Parents will refer to it as lying, but it's different from an intent to deceive. It's filling in missing pieces with what they don't know, with something that sounds like it fits. These are people that are also very suggestible. I've heard the term moral chameleon. They'll take on the attitudes and the beliefs and the behaviors of people around them. They're very easily taken advantage of. They're very easily become the fall guy for a situation. So that inconsistent performance. R.J. Formanak is an adult who's on the spectrum, and he says, I am consistently inconsistent. Again, I know it yesterday, I knew it the day before, I might know it tomorrow, but right now I can't find it. There are a number of abstract concepts that really can be difficult. Time, we mentioned that already. Being able to understand time. Let's say, in the household, dinner is at 6 o'clock. So they may not recognize that at 5:30, that means dinner is in about 30 minutes. What project can I start, or what can I do with my time in 30 minutes? They may start working on a project that's going to take hours that they don't want to interrupt, they don't want to stop, but they don't have that ability to process time in a way that says, this is not the time to start that project. Kids and homework across the board, that's a challenge, right? But homework is one of those things that in our families, in our homes where they're dealing with prenatal alcohol exposure, is especially difficult. And I think about he's a man now, a young man, but a boy his mom shared, they would set aside an hour to do homework. And, 45 minutes would go by and he had accomplished nothing. But he would say, but my time's not up. He didn't understand that he needed to work on things bit by bit so that in an hour's time span, he could do what he needed to get done. In his mind, I still have time. The hour's not up yet. I still have time. Money is a pretty abstract kind of thing, but not just the value of money, but the value of things, the value of items. We see kids making trades for something that they want. They have something they're not using. Maybe a very uneven trade. They may, again, be taken advantage of, but they just don't understand the value of items or of things. The idea that something belongs to someone else. The whole idea of ownership is a bit abstract. If I am, I'm sitting somewhere and I see something and I want it and nobody's there with it, I may just take it, not understanding that it actually belongs to someone. I met a young man, he was 18 years old at the time. He was about to go to prison for grand theft auto. He did not understand at 18 that what he had done was wrong. Yes, he had taken the car. Yes, he had driven it around, but when he was finished with it, he put it back where he found it. Again, let that sink in. This was not a person trying to make excuses to get out of trouble. They borrowed the car, but they put it back. They didn't understand that that was not okay. Because the car was there, nobody was using it, they used it. Math is a tricky thing. As a young child, when we're learning arithmetic, it's pretty concrete, right? We use manipulatives, whether they're blocks or whatever we have. We can have 2 of these and we have 3 of these and we put them together and we can count there's 5. Well, somewhere around 2nd grade, 3rd grade, we start to think about math in a very abstract way. And often kids will do well in school early on. It's when we start introducing those more abstract concepts that they really fall apart. Now, some people will never enjoy math, and that doesn't necessarily mean prenatal alcohol exposure, but it's one of the areas where our children are very often struggling the most in understanding math concepts. So I hear lots of people who generally don't like math say we never use math anyway, why do we need to learn? But we do use math all the time. Again, their difficulties in math are probably going to be more difficult than other areas. They may struggle in some academic areas, do very well in others. But again, math is typically one that's more difficult. Even if their IQ is in the normal range, they may struggle significantly with math. And why is that? Well, here are some of the reasons. It's that processing speed. It's that ability to process information efficiently. It's all those executive functions we talked about. It's that working memory, being able to hold some information in your mind while you're putting it together with other information. So, several areas of the brain can be impacted. Several of those areas of the brain are important in being able to understand and use math. They're very black and white, can be very black and white, very concrete thinkers. So just take a moment to look at this cartoon. He did exactly what the sign said, draw a bridge ahead. Now, the word draw has lots of different meanings, doesn't it? This person interpreted as, I need to get out pencil and paper and make a drawing. Seems silly, right? But it is an example of someone's very black and white thinking and how they see something, they interpret it, and not able to see it in a different way. So perseveration can happen in terms of thinking, of doing, of speaking. Again, it's part of that very rigid process of understanding things and interpreting things. They can very much get stuck. And again, is this on a thought? Is this on an action? We said earlier that dopamine is one of those neurochemicals that helps us shift gears. And somebody who has difficulties with perseveration, perhaps their dopamine levels are not where we would want them to be. They have a hard time shifting tasks, changing from one thing to another, one thought to another. They get very involved in something and they find it extremely difficult to stop. And I have a little cartoon that I think really helps us understand that a little bit better, called tendril theory. When I'm focused on something, my mind sends out a million tendrils of thought, expands into all the thoughts and feelings. And when I need to switch tasks, I must retract all of the tendrils of my mind. And this takes some time. It's a simple little cartoon, but for me, it helped me understand what's going on when somebody is having difficulty shifting gears. They can't just stop one thing and go to another. They have to pull back all that information before they can make that switch. So again, we see that in somebody, in the way they speak, in an activity they're doing, even in a thought that they're having. They need time to make that change. And often, we live in a world that doesn't offer that kind of time. So I'm asking you to generalize a lot today, to take what we are learning and apply it to new situations. It would be wonderful if there were some very black and white concrete suggestions, and there are some suggestions, but you have to learn to apply them in the appropriate way in appropriate situations. That's something that's very difficult for someone to do who has prenatal alcohol exposure. So whether it's learning a rule, and again, we talk so much about children, but remember, this is not something that goes away. There's not a surgery. There's not a medication. They don't outgrow it. So we're talking about adults too. But they learn a rule in one setting, one situation, and they're not able to understand that, this same rule probably applies over here. So you think about classroom settings. They may understand and have a pretty good ability to comply with rules in one classroom, but they go to the next classroom and now it's a different situation. It's a new experience. It's a new set of circumstances, and they don't understand that those same rules apply in that different place. So they need to be taught again that the rules do apply here. So imagine how much effort it takes to relearn, to try to understand that the situation is different, but the same rules still apply. Think of how exhausting this condition is for people. Their brains are working so hard just to process information, to take it in, to know where to store it, and then know how to retrieve it and make sense of it. We see a lot of communication challenges. Again, their verbal skills are often much better than their comprehension. So they can carry on a great conversation, but may not fully understand what's being said. They may be able to repeat exactly what you said. That doesn't mean that they can apply the information or that they know what it means. You know, we liken it to voicemail. You play the recording, it says exactly what that person said, but that device has no ability to understand or interpret or to do anything with that information. That can be the same with somebody who struggles with these communication challenges. Other problems related to learning and to language. Difficulty in understanding meaning. Again, when you're a very concrete thinker, and we have so many words that we use that are confusing, that have multiple meanings. Think of the idioms that we use on a regular basis that really, when you take them at their face value, don't make sense at all. We talked already about confabulation and how that can make it difficulty to communicate if you're not sure what they're saying is real or true, and neither are they. They may agree. They tend to be pleasers. They want to comply. They want to appear that they understand what's going on. And so they may agree. You may ask them, do you understand? They may be appearing that they understand and they know what's going on when they may not. Again, they may talk a lot, but that doesn't mean that they're fully understanding. That slow processing speed, again, it takes them longer to process information. There are so many brain systems involved in understanding language. You know, it's not just what's happening in our ear, it's what's happening in several parts of our brain, being able to take in that information, to understand what does a word mean, especially if it has multiple meanings. What does it mean in this situation? How does it relate to what I already know? All of those things take time. And if their brain is processing at just a little bit slower speed, all of those processes are slowed down. So they may not understand. They may not even be able to take in everything that's being said because they just need a little more time. Dysmaturity. And I don't know how many of you have seen the movie Big, starring Tom Hanks, but to me, it is such a wonderful analogy. So Tom in this movie, he's a child. I think he's 8 years old as this boy. And there's so many things he wants to do. And he's always being told, you know, when you get big, you'll be able to do those things. So, you know, he goes to the park, the Zoltar machine is there. He puts in his coin and he says, I wish I was big. And his wish is granted. And in his body, he's an adult, but he's still that 8-year-old child. Imagine the challenges that creates. That's very much what our people experience. We need to think younger. We need to look at them and say, okay, here's what I see. Here's chronologically how old they appear to be, but how old developmentally are they? So Tom Hanks ran into that. This character ran into that in this movie all the time. People had expectations of him because he looked like an adult, but inside he was still an 8-year-old boy. We see lots of challenges with sensory integration. And again, this may be just certain senses. They can be overly sensitive. They can be undersensitive. But when your sensory system isn't functioning well, it's very easy to become overwhelmed. Okay. Our brain is processing so much information right now that we don't have to worry about it. It's regulating our body temperature. There may be sounds that we're taking in, but they really aren't relevant to what we're doing right now. So it just kind of filters those out, and we aren't conscious of them. For some people, those filters don't work, and they're taking in everything all the time. It's exhausting. And we're all so familiar with 5 senses. Some suggest we have 7 senses. I'm suggesting we have 8 senses, and we're going to look at those. Why does sensory integration matter? It helps us to organize our thoughts, our movements, our actions, all of our systems, all of our existence. When our sensory integration systems are working properly, that gives us a foundation for our behavior. It helps us maintain attention. We're much better able to have those positive relationships. Our senses develop naturally through play as we are children. But again, if there are regions of our brain that are impacted, it's not going to develop as we might want it to. So here's one of those systems less known, our vestibular system, our sense of balance and movement. As an infant, this is one of the first systems to develop. I say not as an infant, but as an embryo. It relates to gravity, safety, survival. Our arousal and attention are all connected to our vestibular system. It's who am I and how do I relate to the space around me? So a lot of that input is coming from our eyes and ears. If there are certain areas of our brain, if the left part of our brain is damaged and the right part of our brain is primarily operating our systems, we may even lose that ability to understand that we are separate from the objects around us. It's located right up in here in this part of our brain somewhere, that part of our brain that understands that here's where I end and here's where things around me begin. So our proprioceptive system, somewhat related to the vestibular, but not exactly. It's the input from our muscles, our tendons, our joints. It's helping us understand where our body is in space, okay, how it relates to each other, that feeling of weight or pressure, the ability to move based on all of those body parts working together, okay? You know, it's how are they all connected? It also helps us detect how far am I away from these things next to me? That sense of just how close, how near, how far. So for those kids who have no sense of, and adults, no sense of personal boundaries and personal space, you know, maybe their proprioceptive system isn't functioning well. And then our interoceptive system. It's everything connected. What's happening? It's those very basic functions in our body that we really don't think about at all. Hunger and thirst. Are we cold or warm? Tired or alert? Is it time to move those waste products out of our body? And it's always trying to find that sense of balance to keep things in check. So a little bit more here about the interoceptive system. You know, managing our emotions, understanding our emotions, being able to label them, identify them, manage them. It's managing our heart rate. Again, that feeling of, are we hungry? Are we full? Are we satisfied? Am I nauseous? Do we get cramps in our muscles? All of these different things are part of that interoceptive system, and it can be impacted by prenatal alcohol exposure. So you think about it in terms of hunger. Someone may not feel hungry. They may need to be reminded to eat because their hunger system isn't functioning well. Or it may go the other way, where they don't recognize when they're full, when they're satisfied, when they've had enough, and they will continue to eat and need to have somebody help them regulate that. So if somebody is oversensitive, they're going to overreact to things. They're overreacting to sights, to sounds, to movements, to all kinds of things. They may really work hard at trying to block out that stimulation because they know it's just too much. So they may try to withdraw. Anytime we come into a new environment, even if we're just shifting from one room to another, we have to take in information that helps us know, how am I going to function here? Even, are the lights too bright? Is it too dark that I can't see what I need to see? When people's systems are hypersensitive, they're taking in that information all the time. Our bodies are taking it in too, in our brains, but we just don't have to think about it. For some people, all of that information is just overwhelming them. I put on here picky eater because even that is a piece of being hypersensitive. It may be too many colors, too many textures, a smell that is really intense and strong that others of us may not notice. It may be the fact that there's too many things mixed together. And if you were able to separate them, that they could eat them one at a time and not be oversensitive. So I know I'm throwing out a lot of the challenges here. It's worth talking about being undersensitive because kids who are undersensitive to touch may be very rough with each other and how they handle, how they touch, with objects, with other people, because they have to touch things in a way that is more rough in order to feel it, in order to know they are actually handling things. I'm going to breeze through a couple of these things because, again, you'll get this information in the slides. I see we've got just a couple of minutes left. Moody. When you have difficulty in
Hi there, folks. We may have lost Mary there for a second. I'm not sure if you're still able to hear her or not.
and you'll have many of these things.
Great.
If there's questions, now is the time. But I especially wanted to skip ahead to this one graphic because it's a continuation of what we were looking at before. Well, before we do that, this will be in your information, these 8 magic keys developed by Deb Evanson. We haven't got time today to talk a lot about strategies, but here are some very basics of strategies, things that are important for us to put in place. We know there's this gap between what someone is able to do and what our expectations are. How do we help and put systems in place to help manage that gap? We can't just fast forward their learning. We need to put things in place that are able to help them function better. So are there any questions that have come in the chat that we can answer quickly? Again,
Mary, there's some questions. Maybe we'll get to one or two of them. One of them says, all the descriptors of executive functioning are the same challenges with those with ADHD experience.
Yes.
I wonder what the co-occurrence prevalence is of FASD and ADHD.
Great question. 60 to 80% of people that struggle with prenatal alcohol exposure will have symptoms of ADHD. It's huge. Right. It's very highly correlated. They think, certainly there are other causes of ADHD, and they think about 30% of cases are connected to prenatal alcohol exposure, but the overlap is huge.
Thank you. For the sake of time, we're going to go ahead with one more question. Is fetal alcohol syndrome misdiagnosed often? If so, what are some diagnoses that it's mistaken for?
Very much so. And it's most often just underdiagnosed. It's just not missed. It's not considered at all. One of the handouts that I will provide that can go out to folks is a chart that shows, I took it out of the slide because it's too busy to be in a slide, that shows the overlap. There are a number of overlaps with autism. There are some things that are different. People's exposure to trauma There's actually a slide that I skipped over. When you see the slide, you'll see that connection. Many of the symptoms and the signs are the same as children who've been exposed to trauma as well. So there are lots of different overlaps. We just need, when we see this collection, we need to think, is this a possibility? Is prenatal alcohol exposure a possibility? And it certainly is. We know no one intentionally drinks to harm their child, but there's so many reasons why it happens, and unintentionally and often unknown.
Thank you so much, Mary. Great information, abundance of information. I personally loved the different ways that you showed things through cartoons and other visuals. Your graphics were phenomenal on your PowerPoint. And as Mary had shared with everybody, that she has even more information that because of time she wasn't able to share, but she wants to make sure that everyone gets it. So again, the PowerPoint will be available in about 3 to 5 days on the sccmh.org website under the Recovery Summit. You'll be able to pull that up and take a look at all of that great information that Mary has in there very soon. Thank you so much, Mary. We're going to do our wrap up in a second, but we want to really, really thank you for your time and your willingness today to present.
Thank you all for being here and learning about this. It's such an important topic. Be sure to share.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And for those of you too that wanted colleagues or others to be able to see this, Mary has graciously allowed us to go ahead and video this. So this video would be available in a couple of weeks on the CMH YouTube channel. You won't be able to get professional credits firsthand for watching it, but it's such phenomenal information that hopefully you'll put it in your library, pass it off to other folks for them to be able to watch it and learn about the information as well. So just as a reminder, this Recovery Summit is continuing on to the end of this week. We have a few different presenters and wrapping up with our panel discussion on Friday. Tomorrow's presentation will be at 9 a.m. presented by Michelle Boudreau from MD-HHS on supporting recovery for co-occurring disorders through mindfulness-based relapse prevention. To see that information, and if you're not registered yet, please visit sccmh.org under the Events tab and the Recovery Summit. As a reminder, anybody requesting professional credits, you will receive one certificate of all of your accumulated credits by October 30th. That will be provided via the email that you provided when you registered. Please complete the short survey at the conclusion of the webinar today. And thank you again, Mary. Your time and information is appreciated. And thank you to all that attended today. Have a fantastic day.